Wow. The 2 weeks of never-ending wind and 35 below have finally ended in the mighty Peace Country. And you know, that's partly due to the fact that we are in a Chinook zone here. And the huge Pacific storms that the receding Arctic front drew into the lower mainland when they come across the Rockies create a little microclimate here for us. So it's about -5 here right now, which is considerably warmer than, you know, a lot of North America, particularly northern North America. I do want to say though, in 2 weeks of -35 and ongoing blizzards, my lights never went off, my gas lines never froze up, my house doesn't have icicles hanging from the light sockets inside, and basically nobody is currently in a panic to replace all their water lines, because you know what? We deal with this every year. So why am I saying that? I'm saying that because as I was leaving the house this morning, I seen supposedly government officials in Texas, people who are supposed to be responsible, people who are supposed to, you know, show some fortitude and honesty to the people that elect them, talking about how this is a weather-related incident. And, you know, if that was true, most of us in northern Canada would suffer like Texas is suffering right now every single year, but we don't. So what you might not know about me is I spent 4 decades of my life in facility operations and management, or maintenance and management. And what I can tell you for sure, after 40 years in the gas and electrical industry, is gas lines don't freeze up because it gets cold outside. So your governors and mayors that are telling you that, they're just making that up. And that's disgusting and irresponsible, because it diverts attention. And I guess what they're doing is really just trying to defend themselves because they're being wrongly accused anyway. But they could still offer more honest answers than they do, and they could still avoid making stuff up. Man, I hate that. People just make shit up. What Texas might want to do is take a look at their utilities. Because again, speaking from my 4 decades of experience in these matters, it is true that utility leadership teams that choose to pamper their board of directors and shareholders by cutting corners on major maintenance issues do end up in a position where, you know, relatively minor issues like a 2-week-long storm can take them out of business completely. I can also tell you from that same 4 decades that if your gas lines are freezing up, the companies who have the privilege of making millions off the people's resources aren't doing their job. That gas that's supposedly freezing up, that's not pipeline spec gas. If I was wrong, there'd be no gas moving in this part of the world at all. And a very large percentage of the gas being used in North America is actually moving from this area. So somebody in that isolated gas grid, perhaps everybody in that isolated gas grid, is not producing to spec. Which brings us to another thing, and this you maybe can hold your politicians to task for. And you know, I haven't done the research to even begin to understand it, and I'm 99% certain I won't be sympathetic if I do. But for whatever reason, and this is news to me, I had no idea anybody would do this in this day and age, but Texas has decided not to be a part of the national energy grid, neither gas nor electricity. At least that's what I'm hearing. It sounds utterly unbelievable in 2021 that could possibly be true, but apparently it is. So maybe that's driven, I hear that there's still a never-ending movement in Texas to claim independence, and maybe by maintaining an independent energy grid, you feel more independent. But you know what happens in the rest of North America when something like what happened in Texas happens? All the rest of us increase our production lines to max. Energy flows in from every direction, and the grid maintains a balance. And maybe 3/4 of the power production in Texas is down, but it shouldn't have affected every person in Texas. It doesn't anywhere else in North America. And for those of you that think that maintaining this hugely inconvenient and, as it now turns out, potentially dangerous independence will somehow lead to an easier transition to true independence, if that's really what you want, and honestly there is very little in the database to suggest that would be wise, but that's not my call. But you should look around. All the Canadian energy infrastructure is completely married to all the US infrastructure other than Texas. All across Europe, nations merge their infrastructures for the reasons I spoke of earlier. It's just plain makes sense. It's just plain the easiest, most economical way to provide for energy reliability for all people. The whole concept is based on the idea that almost nothing ever happens everywhere at once. This blizzard does seem to be a little bit different. It happened almost everywhere at once. But nonetheless, even though the blizzard happened everywhere at once, infrastructures that were poorly maintained and subject to collapse just because it got cold outside, that was not the North American norm. That seems to be a Texas thing to allow that to happen. And you know what? It could be a part of politics too. My understanding is the big reason Texas wants to go their own way is because of anti-regulatory environment. If you don't regulate your energy suppliers, then their board of directors and shareholders will regulate them. And I think that's what we're seeing in Texas right now. An energy grid regulated by corporate entities who don't care that your entire house has been destroyed because they pocketed 10 years worth of advanced profits. Just saying, good to be back. Thanks for listening.